How many of you have heard like Alibaba has a region in Sydney with 2 data centers? Wow, man, like we've been operating in this region for almost 2.5 years, and no, man, it's okay, because all of the presenters here always talked about the 3 largest cloud service providers, like, Alibaba Cloud was never in those lists. But just to give you a bit of fact here, like, Gartner recently recognized us as the #1 in Asia Pacific in terms of the revenue. So you should probably be checking out Alibaba Cloud as well. But just like a bit of about me, like I'm a technical evangelist and a principal solutions architect with Alibaba Cloud. I've been with the company for almost 3.5 years. Originally based in Singapore, got transferred here last year, and I tried to run the local community here. So you might hear me, or you might see me in the community meetups like across Australia and New Zealand as well. I'm an ex-developer. That's a sad part for me because I don't get to do hands-on development these days. But changes are inevitable, but things happen much faster as well. Okay, so this talk is going to be a bit boring for somebody because I'm going to reiterate some of the points that like a lot of the experts talked about here. Like, why do you need serverless? Why serverless, and then probably try to define a few traits about serverless, and then we look at the platform. So this time, just because I'm a bit selfish about my KPIs, I'm going to introduce Alibaba platform, not the generic serverless platforms, and then probably end of the session, I'll try to show you a demo, quite different from what you have been hearing until now. I won't look at compute. I'm going to talk to you about data, like, a data platform from Alibaba Cloud as such. So just to reiterate the point, why serverless? One of the most important point that you would always have to think about is like, you don't have to worry about the underlying infrastructure anymore. Always get to concentrate on the business logic. Like, you've got to run a website to scale it up. So there's a business problem that you would want to solve. You don't think about, whether it's run under containers or like, how many virtual machines are run, like is there a cloud OS running behind the scenes, or what OS are you running? You would not want to worry about all of these things. You just want to concentrate on the business problem, which is what is paying you the dollars. So most of the time, IT organizations are at cost centers, like, they burn money. So the business is what, like, earns the money and then pays these IT companies so that, like, they can sustain these business value solutions out there. So you always have to think from the business perspective, not just from your technical perspective. Like, you just want to use most of the cool solutions, technical stuff out there. That's not what the business wants. They just want to ensure that, you run the business in a cost-effective and sustainable manner. Higher resource efficiency, which is what like most of the speakers talked about here, and even Brett touched out on a few of these points about like how do you ensure that you've got value for the dollar that you put in. So serverless is all about like ensuring that you only pay for what you use. Like exactly, you execute a function or a business logic for 1 minute, a few seconds, a few microseconds, you only get charged for it. But I don't think like you'll have functions that execute for a few minutes and all. And these days, with the advent of all these IoT, smart devices and all these things, you might require a lot of these, edge-based processing that is required for you. So like Knative and all this like, open source technologies coming out, it would be easier for you to run similar code like, that you have been running on your cloud platform to be run on the edge so that you can come up with, insights much faster or like, processing much faster. So these are like, some of the indicators, like, at least from my perspective, like, which would require you to think about a serverless platform. So just thanks to the authors, like, I just copied the traits from them, but then this is exactly what like everybody talks about. Like these are the traits of what is a serverless technology. So the first one obviously is no management of servers, but like some of the speakers mentioned here, I still believe like there's no concept of being like truly serverless. There's still servers behind the scenes. Somebody else is managing it for you, so that the overhead of managing those servers sometimes might be passed to you in terms of like cold starts, having to pay, being not able to justify the cost involved in like running a service and all these things. The next one is self auto scale and auto provision. So if you've heard about Alibaba before, we run a Singles Day festival on 11th of November. We call it the Double 11. On that one single day, last year we sold almost $32 billion of US dollar worth of product. That involves like private islands, Ferraris, yachts, and all those things. You name it, anything in this world like was sold on the platform. But our database engineering team's head was presenting the other day in Singapore, and he was mentioning that the moment that the second gets on to the 11th of November, there was a spike that I don't think like you can ever imagine being able to provision infrastructure for it. So everything inside Alibaba today runs on containers. Like you talk about any workloads that we run internally, we run on containers. We also have a container runtime engine called Pouch Container, which is used internally. But the point here is that if you have got these spikes in your business, like you'll have to deal with changes in your requirements, usages, and all these things. There's no way you can pre-provision infrastructure. There's auto scaling for EC2s, auto scaling for ECS from Alibaba Cloud. There's auto scaling for compute engines, but you still not be able to closely follow up the request from the users and then being able to scale it up. So serverless gives you that option, being able to adapt to the incoming request and then only get to provision resources what you want. Cost based on precise usage. Obviously, you don't pay for the underlying servers that is being provisioned by the CSP. Rather, you only pay for the function execution duration. So that might have a little bit of overhead, the containers coming up online, getting executed. Probably if you don't use the container for a long time, it might go off the context and it might have to be brought back in. So the cold start time always adds up to your cost and all those things. But still, you only pay for what you use. So performance capabilities are defined in terms other than host size and count, where we had a very good presentation on how serverless is used in A Cloud Guru. I heavily use A Cloud Guru to keep up with the market. But obviously that's a good example. You don't have to worry about how much CPU cores you provision, how much memory you use, and all these things. You just say, okay, I just need to start running my website that scales to 1 million users or 2 million users or 10 million users. And finally, it's assumed that implicitly serverless gives you high availability, but you still have to ensure that you develop you architect your applications for failure. So that's one thing that you'll have to have in your mind. No systems can give you that 100% SLA or availability. So you'll have to always think what architecturally can you do from your own design to ensure that you get the high availability. But serverless gives you that close to 100% SLA or availability. So just am I going a bit too fast? Just to talk about the serverless platform from Alibaba. So there's actually many domains in which you can think about having serverless. So previously we used to always talk about IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. And then the borders between all these offerings started to blur, and people had started to having something called backend as a service, function as a service, and obviously AWS Lambda made serverless a bit popular, but that is the advent of functions as a service. So, but serverless is not just being offered in compute. So if you think about today on any offerings from any cloud service providers, they've got offerings on multitude of domains. So that includes compute. The first one being compute. So the compute offering from Alibaba Cloud is called a function compute, which is the equivalent of Cloud Runs or AWS Lambda or Azure Function. So that's just defining your own function. You come up with a runtime of your choice, Node.js, PHP, Python, or whatever it is, or you can even bring in your custom runtime and have it run on Alibaba Function Compute. So what happens is that we will ensure behind the scenes, or the cloud service provider, Alibaba Cloud in this perspective, will ensure that your functions is being run as and when the request comes in. So you don't have to worry about how do we structure the infrastructure, how much internal provisioning we will have to do. So you only pay for the duration of the execution. Then we also recently launched something called a serverless Kubernetes. So out of our container service offering, we provide two container management solutions. One is based on Docker Swarm, the other one is based on Kubernetes. And with the popularity of Kubernetes, we started offering 3 different varieties of the container service. One, obviously, your fully managed, the client managed Kubernetes, where you have to think about your master nodes and worker nodes management. Then we started giving something called a managed Kubernetes, where the management of the master nodes is actually left with Alibaba Cloud, and you only worry about your worker nodes. And the third offering is obviously the serverless Kubernetes, where you think about or worry about pods and anything about pods. So just think about your application design. How do you want to deploy? You just give it to the serverless Kubernetes, and then you would start having the benefits of it. So no management of the Kubernetes cluster. So networking, everything will be taken care by Alibaba Cloud. Then obviously we have got API gateways, open API frameworks, and all these things, which is the front end for you to start sending in requests for any services. Like, so we were just talking about like a Cloud Guru taking all your incoming requests through an API gateway. So API gateway inherently is actually a serverless service, so you don't have to worry about provisioning infrastructure behind the scenes. On the storage front, one quite popular service from Alibaba Cloud is obviously something called OSS, Object Storage Service, which is similar to AWS S3 that you might have experienced before. So behind the scenes, you don't have to think about how much disk capacity that we would provision, how much of compute capacity we would provision, and all those things. You just forget about everything and just put the data in there, and then get charged for how much of a data you put in there. And likewise, like we have got data stores which are serverless, like we have got analytics, which is providing you with log service capabilities, data lake analytics, and max compute and Pi. So I just briefly touch base on the last two components here. One is called max compute, which is an in-house developed big data processing platform, which is not really based on Hadoop technologies, but an grounds-up developed big data processing platform as such. So by this max compute platform, what you can do is to store data. Sorry. Okay. So with this platform, it's actually a truly serverless big data platform by means of, you'll be able to ingest data, store data inside it, and then you can even run your data processing algorithms on top of its compute platform. So what you would be charged is the compute units that you would be using to process your data, not just like, you don't have to pre-provision like number of cores, number of GB of RAM and all those things. You just think about how do you run your ETL pipelines, or how do you run your data cleansing or data processing pipelines, and then everything else will be run serverless here. Likewise, we have got a machine learning platform, which is also similar to the AWS recognition, or like most of the AWS machine learning capabilities out there. But the difference here is that, again, it's also a serverless platform where you define your models, you either make it train using the data within the max compute platform, or you run it on a production scale. We would only charge you for the amount of usage that you have, like be it on the data usage or be it on the compute usage. Then again, messaging is another domain where people have a lot of these serverless offerings, but we also have similar serverless offerings in terms of messaging domain. One of the major ones is message queue, which is also based on RocketMQ, which was open sourced by Alibaba quite long back. But the point here is that not about introducing the Alibaba products, but the serverless domain is not just restricted to compute. It can be used in multitude of domains as such, like, there's compute usages, there's data storage usages, there's data processing usages, and then recently we also have machine learning AI based use cases that you can apply serverless to. So it is just the thought process of, like, having to concentrate on your business problems and then forget about all your underlying infrastructure requirements. Okay, so again, 20 minutes is not enough for you to tell you that what works for you, what doesn't work for you, but just to give you a perspective, some solutions might work for a certain use case, some solutions might work for a different use case. So on a spectrum of usage, I just want to pick like two different services. You think about containers, and you also think about functions. So containers gives you that extra flexibility of managing all of these things together as one kind of combined block. Rather, functions is always good for your event-driven programming methodology, where you have a function that responds to a particular event, and that's it. Like, it's always stateless, or it's suited mostly for a stateless kind of a use case. On the other hand, if you want to work on a serverless Kubernetes or a container-based deployment, what you have got is the option of running most of your co-working components to be put together inside a VPC or a private network, have the services share some kind of common data, some kind of a common state and all those things, and then they could work together and then get you the results. So choosing one serverless option over the other is purely based on your particular use case. Whether you want to just respond to one single event and then don't maintain any state, that's up to you. But you have to first understand what are the serverless offering from a particular cloud service provider and think about what will work for me and what won't work for me. But once you have done this particular choice, I just want to get to this slide before the demo. Always remember there's certain set of headaches that you have to always deal with when you're in a serverless domain. These are three things that I always think is a bigger headache to deal with, but there could be others. I'm not a serverless expert as such, but I think observability is actually a big concern for everyone. You think about breaking down your larger monolithic applications to a serverless based architecture, you start to have a lot of these moving parts. How do you ensure that these things work together? If there is a problem in the execution of a particular event, how do you ensure that that is being properly traced and all these things? So there are multitude of solutions that you can employ. There are open source solutions like open tracing, traceability solutions, or companies like Datadog, which provides you with the solution. But from our point of view, what we provide is actually an open tracing implementation, which is a hosted solution from an Alibaba perspective. We call it the X-Trace. So what you could do is actually get the X-Trace implementation integrated with your functions or your serverless calls. And what it does is to give you a bigger picture of how the calls go through each and every functions, how much time did you spend on each and every function, what is the bottleneck that you have on a particular workflow and all those things. The next one I always think is heavier reliance on a particular vendor. Vendor lock-in is what we discussed, a lot of speakers discussed here, but that's something that we would love to have you logged in with us, but you don't have to do that. Frameworks like serverless allows you to have common usages of serverless across multiple CSPs. So you can define your applications in such a way that you could move it from multitude of the CSPs. And serverless Kubernetes or Knative for that matter, allows you to move from one CSP to another. We also recently launched a tool called Fun. It's called the Alibaba Fun tool, and you can search it in the GitHub. What it allows you to define, YAML-based definitions of your application, and then it will help you to launch Alibaba Cloud Services behind the scenes. And finally, latency or cold start time is actually one thing that everyone talked about. And end of this month, we are launching two different recent version of, or the latest version of function compute and serverless Kubernetes. What it supports is two major features. One is one single function itself being able to take multiple requests, like the one that we were discussing earlier in our GCP presentation. We have got this feature currently in a beta testing, and then it's getting launched by end of this month. So you can have a single function to define a concurrency level so that you can have multiple requests being sent to one single function. So that one thing. And you also have an option of predefining a capacity. So we also talked about business not being able to estimate the cost involved. So we also provide you with an option of prepaying for a particular capacity, and then that becomes a baseline for your charging on your serverless domain. Okay, sure. So just being reminded about the time factor, just gonna jump into, sorry. Okay. So for people who don't know about Alibaba Cloud, you can actually reach us at alibabacloud.com, and then you can give us a try. What I'm gonna, oops, this is something that I'll blame it on the Wi-Fi here. So we've got a product called Data Lake Analytics. It's actually loosely based on the Presto implementation, but behind the scenes we use an database engine which is also shared by our MPP database called AnalyticDB. So what it does is actually an option for you to pump in data into our object storage service. So in here what I've done Oops. So what I've done is actually nothing. I've downloaded the GDLT database, which is nothing but the events database that is openly available out there. I've just downloaded like 191 GB of data, CSV files into it, and uploaded into the object storage service in Alibaba Cloud. And then what I've done is to come into the DLA and then create virtual tables that is pointing into the object storage service here. So similar to S3, just this is a service similar to AWS Athena, but then it has its own like differentiators compared to Athena. So like I was mentioning, there's a behind the scenes storage engine that is actually having bit of differences, but what I wanted to show as a demo is this one, but just because of the time constraints. So what it does is actually I've got a function compute function which is running on a particular schedule, and it actually goes into the GDLT database and then looks at a particular web page. And from the web page, it decides whether what is the latest last entry that I downloaded. If it didn't download the last entry, it will go get that zip file from the website, and within the function itself, it will try to uncompress, because function compute now supports up to like 3 GB, 15 minutes of run timeouts and all those things. And then it will upload the zip file into OSS bucket. From the OSS bucket, there's actually DLA which is able to read that CSV file, because CSV is not optimized for better performance. There's packet file tables that we support in DLA, and there's a function compute function which will call a API, another function called to ensure that the data from the CSV file is actually moved into the high performance table. So just one last one on the, okay, so yeah, sure, just, okay, never mind. Any questions that you have while I try to run this one? I'll take a few questions before I run this one. So DMS is actually you can think of it as a serverless data management solutions in the web as well. It's a SQL Server Explorer in the web, so which allows you to connect to a DLA platform behind the scenes. It actually ran through the CSV table and the packet table, and it came back with this 1.1 billion records. What I just wanted to show is the SQL monitor for it. And you can see that went through the 212 GB of data in 7 seconds, which is like much better than some of the closest competitors as well. So.